recursos hídricos residuales.
Mm. Right now, we're having a welcoming, uh, uh, um, and Pedro Morea will give it. So I'll handle the floor to Pedro. Good morning, afternoons to all of you. Thank you for joining this second session where I think it's a very interesting one because as a coordinator and working on the development of the project, I think it's very important to gather all these key stakeholders that we need in order to move forward and meet the objectives of the project. We will going to be sharing um, experiences even out of our region, yeah, from Zambia, from Guatemala, Trinidad, and Costa Rica, and a presentation that it's very interesting from Rodrigo. We will also hear at the operators level because sometimes we remain at the high level, but that field experience is very important as well. And to all you participants, I encourage you to reach out to us because we are now under time limitations, but we will hope to follow up and generate those connections between local partners and regional ones, and also at a community level or national level. And that's what we really want to comply with. And this is just a small part of the process, and we are proud of being able to generate these workshops, but we are willing to follow up and continue working. And with that, I'll hand the floor to Julio so we can continue with the workshop. Thank you, Pedro. Now I will present Mrs. Barbara Schreiner, which is Director of the Global Program from the GIZ. And good morning, Barbara, and I'll hand you the floor. Uh, Good morning to everyone.
Region, and good afternoon to Zambia. I hope our colleague is meanwhile in the call. I cannot see him, and to the colleagues from Germany. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you to the second session of this knowledge exchange, and I have been listening yesterday to a very interesting session, and I think this helped us a lot to visualize both, on one hand, the challenges for developing functional and inclusive data platforms to serve the national and regional purposes. And on the other hand, the role of existing platforms and knowledge exchange, where I think is a rich potential for exchange and joint learning already in the region, what I have seen. And from my own experience in data collection and processing for monitoring purposes, I can strongly recommend to take the time for a proper development of the goals where you need the data for, and what kind of data exactly. And I think for this, it's really a good thing to learn what others have done, because data collection is expensive, and it need be updated regularly, and the scope of use is really much necessary at the beginning to be precise on. So in today's session, we are looking at a bigger picture. Within this, we are zooming out a bit and We are looking at platforms as one of the key elements to drive institutional reforms in the water sector, and also what potential they have to support an institutional as well as an intersectoral coordination. Under the CReW Plus project, GIZ is supporting 11 countries, as you may know, on development of strategic policy instruments. And we are trying to ensure that those policies are linked to, on one hand, the advancement of financial instruments and also innovative small scale infrastructure. Within this, it's also necessary to have an interinstitutional as well as intersectoral exchange. And I'm sure it will be a major step to advance the vision of an integrated water and wastewater management. We also strongly believe that regional and international exchanges of experiences play a key role in supporting this vision. So finally, I'm sure that today's event will help all of you to explore further the wealth of knowledge that is available in the water sector community that we are all making up. I wish you an interesting session. Thank you.
Which uh, he can provide us uh, a little bit of a summary of today's agenda and also of what was discussed yesterday. Thank you. Uh, and go ahead, Eberhard. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to you that are on the other side of the continent. Um, Special greetings to my colleagues from Africa that are joining us today. Yesterday, we had an event regarding the need and importance of data platforms. We saw, on one hand, that the significant advances like in Costa Rica, and also processes undergoing and active, like in Trinidad and Tobago. We also have discussed in the panel the need to better exchange and generate maybe regional platforms if possible. It has been demonstrated that it's a long process, but it's necessary in order to plan and define proper and prioritizable investments. Today, we will be focusing on the question, how can we contribute to improve the institutional arrangements and the coordination to improve and promote the synergies between the data platforms that are trustworthy and accessible for the managers to facilitate managers the processes of planning. Also, we will see a presentation or part of the beat on how to start, and then we'll see two presentations from countries uh, to then have a short break and have a panel that will allow us to exchange experiences and opinions between the different participants of this event. Today, we start our session with our peer, Rodrigo Riquelme, which is a senior specialist on water and sanitation in the Development Bank, with a presentation that Rodrigo, you have the floor. thank you for being in this presentation. I appreciate your presence today. My name is Rodrigo Riquelme, and I'm a specialist on sanitation water for the beat. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the focus, institutional focus within the infrastructural focus for sustainability of the services, both in urban and rural. In many occasions, and just as an overview of the sustainability of the water sources and circular economy to preserve the quality of waters and water sources, which is our objective, we forget that the means for that to occur is that people and institutions that are working in order to achieve that transformation of water from its natural state to a service, and then to recycle the residues to nature. And for that, we need to have people and stakeholders that are aligned so that this actually happen. So what's the important is that from governance perspective and regulatory one, we are asking these institutions, people, and users, and we align them in order to get a better success in a proper management. The presentation show the slides in English, but I will be speaking in Spanish. So the context of this situation is that the sustainable goals are distant for the regions, and although we meet the millennia objectives, we are far away. As you can see, we only have 65% of the population that are aligned with the overall goal, and just 22% with adequate sanitation. So, it's such a huge breach that it's naive to think that remaining with the same techniques and tools we've used, we will be able to meet the 2030's goals. Also, we have a very severe scenario on droughts due to climate change and all that is going on with intense precipitations or lack of them that harden the situation of a certain territory. So the way we are estimating how to solve the resource problem is changing. So from an water operator's perspective, what are the challenges we face? So these are the challenges uh, which are government, which is pushing or pressuring to comply with the service and also meet their political requirements. Also, customers that are not satisfied with the service provided. We also have an environment that is concerned in terms of the quality of this, and we also have employees and contractors that are complaining for due to poor working conditions or salaries. In the graph, imagine that we have a situation where covering the operational costs with our incomes would be enough, but our studies are showing us that it's not even to cover the operational costs, but we even have to uh, we require a greater budget to cover it. If we're talking about 1.4 between ratio on what we're collecting and costs, you can see the reference. Uh, COVID is here to stay. We've had for the past 18 months, and we a number of problems that start from the fundamental, which is health and life of our employees, which they have had serious losses, and they are very sad numbers and dramatic to see. how it has been to some operators. In Mexico, for example, we have had to had many deaths and the pressures they generate on the operators. We also have an increase on washing hands and the usage of water within their households, people without jobs that cannot pay their bills. And we also have the need to supply the sectors that are not having water or additional sectors that need additional water for to meet the necessities of the pandemic. And the three main uh, areas of inefficiency are low collection rates that usually has to do with low and not a lot of people paying the bills, also water losses and connections that are not included or illegal piping, and also inefficient energy usage. And the biggest problem is water losing or loss of water. We need to preserve our water or freshwater resources, but if we're wasting almost half of that, we're really following a bad way in terms of losses. We're losing about 45% of the water that is not reaching their destination, both for physical loss or commercial one. There are a variety of ways to be innovator, uh, and there are ways we are proposing as a bank. Yeah, one of those ways to improve the efficiency of an operator, and that perhaps there are not enough regulatory frameworks to, for example, lower the water that is not accounted for, and that's to work with the private sector in a way that it's adequate contextually. As you know, the bank doesn't recommend nor reject the participation of private sector. Actually, if it tries to facilitate, if a country desires to include the private sector, and we can see as how the collaboration of the private sector as contractor can lower the non-revenue water, and it facilitates the public operator to work. And so this type of collaboration, it's an effective one to work, perhaps not for everyone, but certainly it's interesting to achieve quick efficiencies that will provide immediate gains. And this is how we need to think about service in the future. And in the crew, plus we've thought that we're aware that this is a holistic way to work and address this matter. And we will always get to a structure and vision that needs to combine both green structure and gray. And here I wanted to show you a very interesting option that we daily see it, and we always address it when we're seeing solutions based on nature, or when we see people trying to get a lagoon and some sort of water system uh, for irrigation, for example. And um, so if the green and gray infrastructure must be combined to achieve a harmony that can be met aligning all the stakeholders that I previously mentioned. So green and gray infrastructure are elements that we can use in combination, also with governance and financing schemes that we have utilized recently in the bank, and that are always allocated within the context of water funds. That's a generic term. There's not a recipe to create them, but basically, the water funds are a financing mechanism that includes governance, which is strict and transparent, and that allows to implement sustainable solutions for a specific place or location. It could be a basin, or and what's important for to obtain this virtuous cycle is to align all the stakeholders. Perhaps we have a city that perhaps has a flooding problem or quality of water problem, both in the city or uh, outside, or perhaps there's an area that it's flooded with the excess of water that comes from a city. And one can face those challenges in more holistically if we think in terms of those water funds. They can be created for any measure or culture, but they always must have a good governance that is built with all the stakeholders, and then it's managed by a financier or a government or a multilateral. So, as a water organism, we know that if you think about the operator organisms, it's not so much their specific role, but more of a holistic approach. And also the user it's identified as the first actor or responsible actor as a water user. And that's why it's so important that the operator organism it's always involved because it's the visible face for everything that has to do with water. We also know that this is a technical topic, and we therefore emphasize on the technical secretariat and also a governance that allows the smart management uh, of the funds. These water funds are usually utilized along with a escrow fund, which has as goal to assure that that fund sustains out of the interests of the funds. So if there's a need for an infrastructure, the funds are not utilized immediately. So what it's done is first the design and then allocation of funds comes in part. Then we have the co-financing from alliances from the government or international organisms. And we've seen that there's a lot of interest, and we'll quote a colleague that says that this is a result of the uberization of the nature. And it implies that all of a sudden we all saw ourselves involved in microsystems like Uber in transportation. And so in nature, countries are see themselves unable to manage macro solutions due to governance problems or financing ones. So are the communities and stakeholders that generate these spaces where water funds are created or encouraged. And this is something that is reaching out to every place in the world. And what are our principles? Well, that we need to assure sustainability with a fund that is strong enough. And we are looking for the impacts that are deeper, not just to create a water fund per se, just to create it. We always need to involve the communities. One of the learned lessons is that if the community is not involved, it's probably or likely that it won't work. Also, regarding the micro efforts, we need to be clear that no infrastructure operator cannot move towards sustainability if they don't see their operation as holistically, where all the different parts of like financial unit, planning, customer service, and so on are aligned. And That means creating a system and informational systems that are strong enough in order to help better decision making, and also that is accessible for the user so they can understand the efforts that are being made in order to deliver proper service. Now, when we want to get to the triple bottom line, which is having a system where we have environmental, economic, and social sustainability, where all the stakeholders are benefited as users, as a community, and that the environmental system is also being benefited due to the good quality of the water and its discharges. And our lessons learned is that we need uh, better and more transparent national policies so that the access to information could be faster. We also need internal planning, and our customers or users need to be involved in the processes and always aligned to improve the efficiency of our regulator organisms. Oh, also the continuous improving, it's also something we need to be mindful of, and due to the scarcity of the resources that we have, like water, and also the management of change or change management. And that's why it's not something that occurs one day to the other. That's why we need to continuously improve. We also need to think that how all our the stakeholders are working in collaboration to achieve our goals. The private sector participation should be expedite in their work. Each of them can integrate it uh, as adequately as they see or see fit. And we know or believe that the private sector has a lot to say in this sense. We know that the water operations have been promoted by the private sector because it helps them and it's a need they have in the usage of their operations. That's why they encourage or are great encouragers. And at the end, everything depends on our employees and personnel, so they need to be trained. We have a lot of ways to work between water operators to exchange knowledges, and that's a permanent topic, something continuous. What do we think that it's coming from now on? It's to continue working both in the institutional end as in the operational one. We cannot expect that every law will or regulation will change in a day, but we can start working to improve the way that we face the reduction of water not accounted for, the way they face customer service or deal with it, involve the community more. The water culture nowadays is it's wider. Prior or in all other times, it used to be just a flyer that explained the bill, the water bill. But nowadays, it's the culture is a direct communication with the user so that they can better understand socially and environmentally the complexity of producing water. And finally, working on in technological innovation. Uh, this is a prevalent topic. In our countries, we can take advantage of the technological uh, innovation from countries that have already developed technologies. The back also provides support services in terms of technology, because we don't want people selecting technologies that are questionable and haven't been effective. And so for us, it's important that we have access to technologies that have been proven and are more cost effective so that we can share them with others. And with that, I'm finishing. And my final thought would be that the bank has had direct participation in the rural sector, and uh, and we've seen that the urban sector approves more when they have a rural operator. So that's the ideal scenario. We know that there are several operators that cannot access to work the rural sector, but we've seen though that it's increasing this in exchange with the rural sector in countries like Chile. They have grants so that the water operators can access um, with a fee working with the rural sector, and that allow us to provide a lot of knowledge and support to the rural sector that needs more and more technological and management assistance to face the water in a proper way. So with this, I'm closing, and I thank you very much, and we will continue in touch. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rodrigo, for your excellent presentation with two uh, points that I keep in mind to follow up later on in the panel, the contracts based on performance or results, and water funds that are a way to see beyond what the customers or direct users are. Uh, so also the environmental topic where the source and protection of the water sources is coming from, and also the transfer, I would say, of the costs that represent producing water from the lower basin to the upper basin, where there are poor individuals are working on the locals ones, and they cannot protect nature as we wish they could. So I'm going to ask you a favor. You have an Windows open that is generating a beep or a little sound that makes it hard to understand at times. So I will appreciate if you may close it if possible, please. Thank you. Now, to move forward on our two presentations that we have from a country's perspective, I am honored to invite my friend Kevin Shitombo from Lusaka, Zambia, so that he can present the experiences in the water reform sector in Zambia. And also, I would like to highlight the need and experiences of having a regulatory system through for over 20 years working in the country. Kevin, special greetings, and so I'll hand you the floor.
You for having me. So I'll basically share the reforms that we've undergone as Zambia and how this has resulted into the institutional setup that allows the regulator to come through on the scene, so to say. Am I able to move the slides? It's like maybe if someone can help me move the slides. Or should I share my presentation from here? Right, okay, thank you. In terms of the reforms, when we're talking about reforms, I'm looking at the first definitions.
Creo que no estamos
There,
escuchando, eh, Everhard.
right? And next slide, I think I won't dwell so much on the definition. The next slide. So maybe to just highlight that we are coming from reforms that we started in the early 90s, and some of the issues that prompted us reforming were things like poor service delivery, low cost coverage. We also had inadequate financial resources and cost recovery, and also the issue of tariffs, which were a problem then. Also the issue of outbreak of disease, and also the water use conflicts, especially issues of drought, and the number of actors in the sector. We had, apart from the local authorities that were providing water, we had the ministry in charge of water resources and other community partners. There was also just a lack of general policy and legal framework to manage and provide service. So in terms of reforming, we had one goal. The goals were clear in terms of what we wanted to see. So among those, we wanted to see improved service delivery to all. If you see the letter O is underlined, to just emphasize that we're looking at everyone, either people that are in low-income areas or high-income areas. So with the right institution and legal framework to try and create a better arrangement and setting for water. And obviously the issue of self-financing and sustaining service delivery. So these were basically what prompted reforms and the goal that we had as we were reforming as a country. Next slide. So we've undergone the reform, and one of the things that happened was we needed to define and adopt a policy. And with that policy adopted, then we had to come up with a legal framework to implement the policy. And that resulted in an autonomous bodies to now manage the water supply and sanitation service provision. In Zambia, we have what are called commercial utilities that are running our water, and also the establishment of the regulator. So we have the water policy with the 7 principles that happened in 1994, and the Water Supply and Sanitation Act 1997, which came in as a legal framework. And all the urban centers, we had to ensure there were water utility companies to provide service in those areas. Next slide. So just wanted to highlight the 7 sector principles that came out of the reforms. One of the issues was to try and separate regulation from the executive function of water. We had also to decide that the authority or the mandate should be devolved to the local authorities and the private sector, hence the formation of utilities. We had to decide as well that whatever we do, we should have appropriate technology for local conditions, and also try and increase funding in the sector. But it was also important to separate water resource management for water from water supply and sanitation, and also the issue of full cost recovery through user charge as one of the principles, and the need to improve human resource in terms of developing a human resource to improve provision of service. Next slide. Now, the next slide basically shows this institutional setup for Zambia. So we have the Ministry of Water that is in charge of water, and they are the policy holders and the sector leader, and then also the operations of water supply, that is a utility. They are under this ministry, but also this ministry is also in charge of water resources. That's the current scenario. And then we have the Ministry of Local Government, who owns the utilities that provide water, since the local authorities, who then form commercial utilities under the Ministry of Local Government. So these commercial utilities or CUs are private Zambian companies with 100% shareholding at the moment from the councils, but the law allows for private sector participation up to 49% share capital, and also we can have a management or lease contract. But I should be quick to say that currently all the utilities are 100% owned by the local authorities. But obviously, as I've already indicated, the law allows for private sector to come in. Now, I just wanted to now zero in, next slide, on the regulation in Zambia. So the regulator basically has three focus areas, three broad focus areas. There is the issue of protecting customers. There is the issue of ensuring there is efficiency in the provision of water, but also to create a platform where sector development can happen. And so this is what occupies us as the regulator. So in terms of customer protection, we want to see that everyone is able to access water. It doesn't matter where they are staying. So the rural areas, the low-income areas also are supposed to be provided with water. And we define the minimum service levels that the utilities have to comply with and to ensure that there is no discrimination and tariffs are effective to avoid a situation where inefficiencies of utilities are passed on to the customers. And obviously ensuring the customers have got correct information in terms of what is happening in the sector and just generally promoting awareness. In terms of providing oversight on provider efficiency, we are looking at ensuring that we avoid unjustified costs, promoting efficiency gains, and utilities have to respect standards and ensuring that whatever investment comes into the sector, we get value as a country. But when we look at the sector development, issues of corruption, we have to be on the watch as a regulator so that we can then provide feedback in terms of how things are going and ensuring we create a situation where this does not become a problem. So obviously avoiding capital drains and ensuring that we curb unjustified price transfers, and generally promoting investment and competition. Next slide. The next slide, basically, these are some of the interventions that the regulator would want to focus on. In terms of the institutional arrangements, we are there to ensure that corporate governance is happening, and we are there to ensure that capacity is being developed in the sector so that we're able to handle issues of providing water, and also the coordination among several stakeholders. In terms of service areas, again, we need to strategize there to see that we are creating a conducive environment for investments, but also improving service levels and also creating efficiencies, and utilities have to be effective, and also the sustainability. So these are some of the areas as a regulator we need to focus on to try and ensure service areas are improved. But as a regulator, you also need to have an eye on service to the urban poor. And so this is an issue that we need to also focus on and intervene to ensure that there is extension to low-income areas. But critical, we have to monitor the service levels, issues of tariff adjustment that should also speak to the level of service that our customers are getting so that there is efficiency, effectiveness, and sustainability. Next slide. Now, as a regulator, you realize that you have to deal with various stakeholders. We have the operators, we have the consumers. At times, their interventions or what they are looking for could be poles apart. We have politicians that come in, especially when there's elections, and they would want water to be given free. Development partners who come with the conditions in terms of the resources that are coming in. Government institutions at times who might not want to pay for the services. As a regulator, you need to balance all these interests, knowing that water is a monopoly, and at times it creates a lot of suspicion and tactics, so which you need to manage. So we need, as a regulator, to have right instruments that balances the social and economic interests in the water sector, but also to ensure all sector players comply to the rules that we have put in place, and everyone is treated equally. And the rules in place are, obeyed by all stakeholders. So the regulators are actually then plays that pivotal role to manage even the relationships that exist in the water supply and sanitation sector. But obviously, the regulator would need to be present on on the ground with a limited resource. The next slide. Next slide, I just wanted to show some of the lessons that we've learned regulating. And one of the lesson is that we need to have a holistic approach in reforming and ensuring the sector is functioning. You can't do patchwork. The other issue that is clear is that you need to have an independent driving force for reforms to take effect. In our case, we had a team that was created to just spearhead the reforms that was interministerial, headed by someone from the cabinet. We also need to have units that are autonomous in terms of operations, and I think that has worked well for Zambia, and obviously coherent policy and legislation from the start. We need to be clear about that. The independent regulator with the interests of the poor at heart also becomes critical, and also ensuring that there are more units to promote competition and ensuring we are improving in terms of efficiencies. So basically, those are some of the issues that we've learned, and this is what I wanted to just present, so that then we can, if there are questions, I can deal with that. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, Kelvin. Creo que ha sido una presentación muy interesante de una experiencia.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I think it has been a very interesting experience and presentation, especially since it's coming from another region. So for the Latin American people, it's a very good experience. So for all of us that are now aware of what's going on or happening in Zambia, and the situation that you underwent. It is important because in many of our countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, it's important to be aware of. There's a couple things I have from my personal experience, along with my peers in Navasco and Zambia, is that they annually were doing a sector review. Uh, Independent from and made from external consultants that provided information to the uh, development of the policies, and also Navasco as such had an annual instrument to do an assessment or evaluation for all the commercial utilities and water operators to generate a ranking or a list from top to bottom, which was very important to have as kind of a competence between the operators. And because obviously no one wanted to be at the bottom of the list, so that generated healthy competition. So everyone wanted to improve on a yearly base. So thank you very much I will invite you later on to the panel to share some of the questions and address them. That perhaps those questions will appear also throughout the next presentation. That will be in charge of the engineer Everstone Augusto, which is Director of Basins from the Environment Ministry and Natural Resources in Guatemala. Engineer, I invite you and hand you the floor for your presentation. Thank you. No. Well, good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here and be part of this workshop in representation of uh, my sector. Thank you very much. And to provide some context, um, the topic on water at a regional level, and specifically here in Guatemala, at a government level, um, the focus on quality water for human consumption, the uh, policies are defined by the health ministry uh, um, uh, with a focus on the water resources as such in terms of their quality and quantity. So the Ministry of Environment defines the guiding principles or policies. So right now, under its current structure and resource management, this year this Ministry of Water was created, and within it, um, to strengthen the integral management of the resource, several agreements at a government level were set in order to promote the protection and preservation of the resource at a, water basins level. Uh, we're talking about political, not a political level, but more of an integral level at a basin level. So we will see, or watershed level. So I would like to share a little bit on my experience and that we've had this year to what is its practical application. As I was mentioning, the vice ministry was created recently uh, and on February. And days after a government agreement was approved, which was an 2021 agreement, and that provided us that support to do field operations. So with a focus, which is it's a more integral focus on protection and conservation of watersheds of the Republic of Guatemala. Uh, at at a country level, there's little information or too scattered instead of surface or groundwater, with a focus on the water resource in terms of quantity and quality. And this is due to that in general terms, many institutions have done several types of studies throughout the years, but uh, there hasn't been yet something that compiles that information and sets it or defines what it's available. So this provides guidelines for us to do precisely that integration of the existing information and provide better context at a field level. The main idea of this agreement as an overall is to generate this information or gather it from the different instances that eventually might be generating it, and that this information serves as institution and country to do better planning of this resource, and also to have it available in both quality and quantity for the different usages that the different sectors needed for agriculture, for human consumption, for the industry, the cattle industry, and so on. So we need to guarantee that resource, every resource related to the watershed level. That's why something very important that determines this regulation is that it indicates, in this case, the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, along with other government institutions like the Cultural Ministry or Mining and Energy One, other actors that we can invite to be part of this proposal. Is that first, we need to have a protection focus. In other words, that what we have, we protect. In other words, we stop damaging at a watershed level. So if we have them of good quality, we need to focus on protecting them, which is a very important point. And same with focus on improving those resources for further usage. Something also very important that these policies are providing is that we require that this, or it is required, this is a continuous process from now on, where if within the information that is being gathered or compiled, and you can determine that to some water source there's not information regarding the watershed, sub-watershed in general terms, that one can generate that type of information that is required with local personnel or the operators that are actually acting in those or working on those watersheds. And finally, as a part of that process, is to define and implement those management plans, which is very important, especially the implementation or implementing part, where now we're talking about information and also where the political stakeholders and governance wants get into play on the defined diversity of activities depending on the needs that were identified on the diagnosis or diagnostics. And this is in this sense, the general objective is to solve that environmental degradation, especially on the water resource. As part of or within the agreement, it's indicated that what is expected is to create this diagnosis or generate diagnosis where you can generate that information, characterization, what studies are available at a level of the forests or watersheds or industries or that are present throughout the watershed or the basin. Uh, it could be at a lower or high level, depending on the different usages that can have. Agricultural usages, for example, cane, for example, requires a lot of the resource. And how all these activities generate a certain pressure to the resource. And the idea is that every user can use the resource and have it available. And so, as part of this experience in previous years in Guatemala, uh, we didn't have control regarding the governance of this resource. So there were several instances where, for example, certain main rivers in the Pacific coast, the river was not getting to the ocean, and that brought social conflicts and also generated uh, involvement of the industrial and populations and the general population to define action items. And also, in this case, well, the river, the goal was to be make possible that the river reached the ocean again. And so, also important to is that as part of the base information that one must have, it's information at a quality and quantity level, because this is our information data points that help us determine the quality and state of the water resource. So if you don't have water, we have to identify why. Same wise with the quality. Perhaps local communities on the lower part will use the resource for consumption. And what are the implications that uh, would it have if this water doesn't meet the quality standards? So that's something important, and those are the crucial elements to consider in terms of the state of the water in terms of the watershed. Also, it's important to mention that almost 40% of the population at a country level is indigenous population. So eventually, we will need to do that type of management in some basin or watershed where we will need to uh, deal with the social and cultural. Perhaps he can rejoin us so that he can continue with his presentation. Okay, I think he's back. Okay, thank you. You can continue. And a small favor, can you please speed up or accelerate your presentation? Okay, sure. As I was mentioning, an important topic within the characterization and diagnostic end of it in Guatemala and the uh, something important to mention as the initial phase is the conformance of a technical advisory committee preceded by the Ministry of the Environment and involving here the Ministry of Management of Natural Resources and also the Ministry of Energy and Mining, which is a water topic is very important. And this year, after approving the agreement, the first meeting was made to conform this. As part of the second phase, uh, Uh, we have the confirmation integration of technical tables at a country level. In Guatemala, territorially, we have 38 watersheds that are identified as such, and now we need to focus our efforts to achieve that characterization at a structural level for the administrators or managers of this or them. And this context, we already created or conformed this year two technical roundtables, uh, mainly focused on the Pacific uh, Ocean watershed. And through these technical roundtables, we have been able to transfer and share to the different users and members of the roundtables. And so we've seen a lot of interest at institutional level and same with the population. And so it has been very helpful to uh, better define plans for better management of the resources in the future. Now, in practice, we've seen different studies that are in the process for application, and what we have done is to reorient the usage of those types of informations that will help for the application of this agreement. So, in summary, there's a defined project that we have as the Volcanoes project, which is the study based on the elaboration and analysis of diagnostics at a Pacific watershed level, where we have about 15 basins or watersheds, and under the context of sustainable and resilient territories, or promoting that sustainable and resilient territories in the landscapes of the central volcanic chain of Guatemala. And so now we can have that approach at a local level with the institutions users also to conform other four round tables and provide them those data points and characterizations that have been done. And from there, define the plans for the future, depending on the needs that are identified on these. going to reconnect to finish his presentation. Please be a little patient. Uh, uh, I apologize for these technical inconveniences, but other something else that we are working on is that on for example, in this case, focusing on the Atlantic watershed. Um, I would be focusing on the Rio Motagua's basin, and where there's an effort focused on the reduction of solid waste or contaminants, and also the implications to marine ecosystems and the neighboring communities. And so we're working at the middle level of the basin with information, with elaboration of guides at the micro basin level, and how can they be applied at a local level by municipalities so that they can more centric or focus point of view can work on the needs, and also the needs to improve the water both in quality and quantity. Also, as I was mentioning, other part of the others studies that are being worked is with IUCN, which is promoting sustainable landscapes in the Rio Motagua Basin, uh, focusing on the lower part of the basin for the last populations or the lower populations. So the management of that water resource, but also integrating the industry and population. We have a macro project that looks to generate a diagnostic of all the Motagua's basin so that they can then do a strategic action plan uh, that will define the specific action items to improve the quality of the water at basin's level. It's so we have activities at the lower middle level, but we need a more integral or holistic approach. And so we're working with UNDP and GEF to provide um, or help us with the resources to generate this. So we know that these agreement constitute a first step that we're uh, doing at a government and country level to promote that integral management of the resource. There's a lot to be done, though. We haven't done analysis or studies or compiled information regarding the Gulf of Mexico's um, which is the north oriental part of the country. So we need to do that work to conform the strategies for that. And that requires the integration of different stakeholders, like I mentioned, um, uh, the population, industry, and government to define that although we have needs, it is necessary to define that we all have the right to the water, both in quality and quantity, depending to our need. So that's basically the generalities on how are we working. Are we currently working in terms of governance of the water resource from the natural resources and the environmental ministry, the watershed level, and including the different actors or stakeholders that are involved in this. So uh, uh, that would be all for me. Uh, and again, I apologize for the technical interruptions. Representative, thank you very much. Um, also taking in consideration that technical difficulties, I still believe it was very good presentation and enriching one, um, and with aspects that perhaps we're not considering enough. The basin as a whole, as a territorial space that should be protected, preserved. It has a land use that is shared and with local participation to improve the protection of the water and where the benefits are. And I understand the particularity of having indigenous population that has rights, uses, and uh, customs that this generates more of the need that it needs to be the actions are need to be more shared and more democratic and more fair. And before going to a small 10-minute break, I want to remind the participants that you can fill please the survey that is in the chat on the left. You see the link that allows us to improve from now on the way the method that perhaps of this type of ideas of exchanging ideas between countries. So I asked the different participants also to please do not stop or turn off anything. Just leave your computer like that. The idea of these 10 minutes is basically to stand up and maybe walk around and then come back in 10 minutes for an interesting conversation in the panel because I have different participants in this talk in terms of institutionality that we need in order to move forward on this topic of the water resources. Thank you. Okay, so I think we're back to continue with the panel, and I want to introduce you to the participants that will be joining us today in this panel. First is Cynthia Barzuna Gutierrez, which is Minister of the Resource of Vice Minister of Water and Seas, Mina, Costa Rica. She's a specialist in environmental right and urbanistic. She has developed different initiatives and regulation of the impact of mm, the usage on the resource, and she's also a part of the environmental institution in charge of minimizing or mitigating the impacts, which is very important matter. She participated in the construction of the environmental policy that was generated in 2004 regarding procedures on the generation of studies on environmental impact, and has collaborated in the creation of several national and regional initiatives in terms of environmental ethics and organization, and also work on the private sector. And then we also have a colleague from Trinidad and Tobago, Sarah Jade Govia, who is a specialist also in the water sector in the Ministry of Public of Utilities in the country, and was a focal point for the CReW Plus project. She has a master's in technology, environmental technology, focused on management of water resources, and her work is focused on the development of policies and strategies, environmental valuations, and development of projects. We also have Andres Sanchez, which is a specialist in the water program on behalf of OAA, the Organization of American States, or OAS. And this is an economist with a focus on the water management with over 10 years experience on the management of portfolios and projects and development and follow-up on initiatives, green solutions. He leads the water team in actions to comply with regulations from the member states of the OAS in terms of water management, and in the Inter-American Program for Sustainable Development. And finally, Hans van Tyson from the GES, and he is the doctor is a civil engineer, specialist in the management of water resources and hydraulic engineering. He has worked in universities, Scout School in Stuttgart for 8 years. He complemented his scientific career with a PhD in civil engineering, and between 2000 and 2003, he worked as a consultant on the private sector before he was hired for the GIZ or GIZ in 2003. Since 2007, he has led water programs for the GIZ in Egypt, Peru, and now in Grenada. And the way we are starting this conversation is that we have certain questions that were formulated and that perhaps you've seen in the program for today's session. The first one is a key question. What are the challenges in our countries, partner countries, to establish a institutional framework that is solid and data platform for the water sector? And I would like to hand the floor to Mrs. Vice Minister uh, so that she can tell us how Costa Rica is facing or dealing with this challenge of having an institutional framework that is solid and a data platform that that we saw yesterday, which is very advanced. Mrs. Vice Minister, I can hand you the floor. The first, I think you know the first question regarding the challenges in our countries to establish a solid institutional framework and data platform for the water sector. Can you please tell us a little bit about your experience in Trinidad and Tobago?
The CReW team for inviting Trinidad and Tobago to again participate. One thing that I would like the participants to note is that Trinidad and Tobago islands under one central government, Trinidad and then Tobago, who has its own regional administration, the Tobago House of Assembly. And this is important context because it means that the two islands have separate water resources systems. And the Ministry of Public Utility is part of the central government that has responsibility for water, wastewater, and water resources. And we also have the solid waste, electricity, met services, and to an extent telecommunications under that portfolio. Because of this dynamic, the water sector ecosystem is made up of the Water and Sewage Authority, who's the utility, and they are the key players in the institutional configuration of the water sector. We also have the economic regulator, who is the Regulated Industries Commission, and they set the tariff for the water and wastewater services. And the environmental regulator is also another player, the Environmental Management Authority. And then we also have a water resources regulator. But the interesting thing about the Trinidad and Tobago case study is that regulator, that water resources regulator, actually sits within the water utility. So they regulate everyone else beside the major abstractor of water, which is the Water and Sewage Authority. And then we also have in the institutional configuration private companies that operate within the water and sanitation space. These private companies are desalination operators. We also have a large bottled water companies that actually export to other islands in the Caribbean and supply us locally. And we have water truckers who are private, and we have sewage haulers who are private as well. In 2005, the Trinidad and Tobago government approved a national integrated water resources management policy. And that document was later revised in 2019 and then further revised this year in 2021. And really, what it speaks to is managing water for competing uses and managing that water at all layers of the water environment, not just the water resources only. So it set up the context or the institutional configuration for us to collaborate and get together to manage development and manage land use for water. We continue to be challenged by that development and regulating and enforcing development, which is being done in a very unsustainable way. So we have a lot of instances of illegal quarrying, hillside development that is not done sustainably or not constructed sustainably, agricultural practices that degrade our watersheds, and also water resources pollution. And all of this impact on water resources and of course impact on the ability of the utility to maintain a particular service. In terms of our challenges for institutional coordination, we are very much people-centric rather than systematic. So it depends a lot, institutional coordination depends a lot on making the right linkages in the different agencies and ensuring that that link, who is an individual, has a clear understanding of where their organization fits in the water agenda. And development regulation, so land use regulation, is very weak. We have a very detailed and bureaucratic process, yet the environmental impact is still very much present, which speaks a lot to enforcement. One of the things that we have learned and we have experienced through projects like the CReW is that it brings stakeholders together who typically would not speak outside of that. So having a system of regulation rather than being focused on people, but more system that encompasses all elements of planning for water resources and development for water resources. So from the economic to land use, environmental and water resources landscape is important for us. And just one of the things before I just close off my introduction is that all of this is framed within the context of transformation which the Water and Sewage Authority, that's the water utility, is undergoing. And one of the key things that we've recognized is that to be able to transform this water utility to get it to provide a better service to customers and the population in general requires water sector reform. And that is basically central to this organizational transformation. So that's it for me for now.
Ya, muchas gracias, Sara, para tener ya una idea cómo.
Thank you very much for that intro, and also to better understand the challenges and what the reality in your country is. And I think we can recap on that or take on that later on. And now let me introduce, give the floor to the following presenter or our panelist so that she can tell us regarding the same question. How does Costa Rica has been able to solve the institutional topic if it's solved, and has been how hard has it been to create such solid platform that you showed us yesterday? We've asked also when did it started, and I think it has been on active for 8 or 9 years. So what are the challenges that you still have in Costa Rica? Thank you. Good morning. So thank you very much for opening this discussion or conversational panel. And also, I can't hear her. Yeah, we cannot hear her, so I have to move to my peer and Hans in Grenada, while the technician helps you address the problem you're having. And so, what are the challenges that you've seen in your professional work so far in terms of generating solid institutions and platforms, data platforms in the water sector? I think that's a very large question, so I'm going to focus on more on Grenada because I think it would be too much to try to address it completely.
Also to represent the small islands here where we speak. Yeah, I'm working within the GEF program. GEF means it's a Canadian climate resilient water sector project, which is financed by the GCF, by the Green Climate Fund, and by the German Ministry of Environment, and of course also of the government of Canada. You have to see Canada is a very, very small country. We only have 100,000 people living here on the island. 340 square kilometers it's the area. So you cannot compare this with the huge countries, even not with Guatemala or with Peru or Mexico. It's completely different setup. However, we are facing certain challenges here on the island, which hopefully we can overcome with some of our activities within the GEF project. I have to say that Grenada is very well prepared and very, very sensitized, let's say, on the level of climate change. So they are really aware of the problems they have here, especially with seawater rising, with the increase of hurricanes. So the topic climate change and water is really important here for Grenada. And within this context, since years, there are some activities to improve also the institutional setup of Grenada. Until now, we have a very nice Water Supply Act, which describes all the services for water supply and sewage. Also included in this act, there is a paragraph about water resources management. That means until now, or up to now, NOWASA, the water utility, is responsible for the water resources management. And that is maybe a little bit similar to that what happens in Trinidad. So if you have the water company and at the same time the water regulating water management, there could be a conflict, yeah, because water utility normally is the one who uses most of the water, and that has to be overcome. Now, since 2 years, we have water policy, which is really following the principles of integrated water resources management. And in this policy, it's already described there should be a separation between the water resources management and the water services. At the moment, it took, by the way, it took more or less 15 years, yeah, to come to that. So everything, maybe it's a little bit slow here on the island, but we have a very, very nice product right now. The policy, I appreciate it very much, what has been done there from the Canadian experts. The next step now is to, we are working on a draft for a water resources management bill. And this water resources management bill will integrate the creation of a water resources management unit, and on the same time also create a new regulatory framework, yeah, for the water services and for the water resources management. That is still ongoing. We are on the discussion now with the different stakeholders, but I'm optimistic that by the next year we will have this hopefully signed by the cabinet, and then we will have also the water resources management unit, which will be hopefully integrated in the public utility regulatory commission here in Grenada. With that, we would have the complete separation between water supply and regulation and water resources management. Yeah. Once we have the water resource management unit created, then hopefully we can start with a intensive capacity building. And that is something which is really needed, not only for the water resources management unit, newly created then, but also for the NOWASA, the water company, which then also has to concentrate a little bit more on the water supply and doesn't have to follow up the water resource management, but it will be still an important partner in this topic as well. About data, we have a very nice digital platform which is called Hydromet, where especially managed under the Ministry of Agriculture, which has been installed in the last years with a quite dense meteorological network here on the island. I think it was financed by the World Bank. I can't remember well. This is working, but the problem is here the question: what do you do with that? And I think there's still what is missing is really the application and using that. Yeah. Then for the water resources management unit to use this data to do modelization. Yeah, to do balances and so on. Yeah, it's the same for the Ministry of Agriculture. But I think we have a very nice institutional setup. I'm quite optimistic that this will develop very, very nicely in the next years.
Ok, gracias Hans Werner. Muy interesante lo que han podido ya avanzar en Grenada. Y ahora
Okay, thank you for sharing. I think it's very interesting what you have done in Grenada. I think I can now hand the floor to the Vice Minister in Costa Rica. Hopefully, she won't have any problems. Let's see. Go on. I think we all can hear her properly. Now it broke again. We will reconnect the Vice Minister again because apparently there's an audio problem and the video is working fine, but audio is not working. So let's see if we can hear her now. I wanted to see if you can hear me now. I don't know what to do now. I don't know if I should speak fast or not. I think so I'm gonna just address the question uh, for time's sake. So thank you very much. Part of the challenge that we have for in terms of institutions are the full information platforms and how to uh, meet this technological breach and how to incorporate important information. One of the things we've been working is that's in here, which is I believe the tool that was shared with you yesterday, the which is a system that we have for the management of the water resource. And we've bet on this type of tools throughout the years that can consolidate all the information and compile it. I heard that what was one of the main challenges in Trinidad and Tobago is the coordination between institutions. And I think that's a common problem we share. We face the same reality in Costa Rica. We have what's called Senara, the water direction and water services provider, having that same facing that same type of issues. Even the electricity company in Costa Rica uh, also generates a lot of available information, and that we had diluted through different institutions and allocated like in silos that was preventing us to access that information. And so this here or this system integrates with several layers where you can see the environmental feasibilities granted at a country level to analyze the cumulative impacts, also to analyze the pressure that these natural resources get, and also integrating all that has to do with infrastructure and public transportation. So that generates several levels of layers, and most importantly is traceability, validation on the field. That at some occasions it's hard, um, and other series of elements that allow us to see the current conditions of the protected areas. And this information that has regenerated contributes to add additional layers to the scene here. And the main challenge we have, and I believe other countries do too, is financing. We do not have the best financing to have the best technology. And so, because what we implement today in terms of technology, it changes. So the big challenge is that what we create today is perhaps dated tomorrow, or it becomes old technology. So how can institutions do to opt for the best technological resources for us to remain updated and that this information continues to be completely open? We've worked on a policy of digital open countries that allows for everyone to access that information. We've used shared files and not that PDFs. And so, what do we do with previous information? We don't know. We have that gap of knowledge to talk, for example, indicators and stats. And undoubtedly, for that, we need information and platforms that are efficient and satellite information also it's important. And then for that, the international cooperation is super important, and to share our experience like we are doing right now between countries, not reinventing the wheel because many already have updated technology that can share with us and teach us on how to implement it, and also what are they exactly doing and what successful models they are using that we can implement as well. In terms of public policies, the problem is the how slow the policy is moving in relation to the technological changes, especially in terms of norms or legal policies. We are updating our national plan for management of the water resource, and this should be a recurrent exercise and continuous conversation. And the norms have to be dynamic because this is a top topic that it's in constant change, and I think that we need to focus on creating policy that is resilient and adaptable to the climate changes and challenges, and also never forget that our body work water bodies can end up in the ocean, so that we have to be mindful of that connection from land to ocean. Thank you very much. I hope you heard me. Yes, we heard you. Thank you very much for your presentation and the situation that you were describing in Costa Rica. I would go back to you ahead in regards to other aspect of the systems of regulation that we've tried to address this morning. And now I handle the floor. I'll go ahead and handle the floor to Mr. Sanchez, Andres Sanchez, and I'm asking you, since you have a more ample or wide perspective what the current situation is for all the member states, is how are you seeing the possibility of generating a good like alliance for proper management of the water resource in the region? Can you hear me? Well, okay. Um, Based on what I've heard from the members of the panel, I would like to highlight a couple of topics that I think what we perceive is the challenges, not just national, but also regional, in terms of participation system, democratization of the information, and so on. I think that it's a very complex problem that we're facing, and I think there are two ways to approach it. We consider that it's not unimportant to talk about that it's not responsible of the countries, but of the sector and also their institutions. So we are talking a variety, there are two different topics, that moves us to promote the policies and within internal and all the systems within the chain in terms of mechanisms of international financing and regional policies. What we see is that one of the main points or aspects that we need to promote in the sector, in the interaction with other sectors, and also in the countries and their interinstitutional interactions, is the democratization of information for decision making in the management of the water resource. And as the Vice Minister was mentioning, to be able to grant access on real time, so that all the stakeholders that have to do with the management of the water resource for usage or preservation and so on can better make decisions and properly better informed for that. And but this information is available for everyone, and the general chain of, let's say, the ecosystem of the integrated management of the water resource. In other words, everyone of every people of a country. What are the challenges to that? There are several, and I think the Vice Minister stated them fairly well, and I have them here as well. So technology is one. The remote tools on pandemic times that have been relevant always, but nowadays is super important for monitoring, and not just for safety matters, and also for institutional presence, because we don't have it, and that's innate challenge that we have due to geographical reasons and others. And uh, and because of that's something that we cannot just specifically locate the responsibility to just the public sector. And also with the COVID, we have the sanitation barrier and exposition and vulnerability of our citizens that live in remote locations. So having those remote tools for virtual gathering is become prevalent, and especially for the cooperation between countries and to actually face the challenges. We're talking also about technological barriers, but also communication and idiomatic barriers, and also the even the y- for the users also to be able to understand how to use the tools. It's important for the democratization of the information so that the countries can actually improve their governance or make it more democratic in terms of the management of the water resource at a national level. And what we have been promoting from the OEA, uh, but in reality is happening on every institution within the region. We have a consortium mentality and work in conjunction involving all the people that knows how to do things. We facilitate, we know that we can't do everything, but we try to look for people that can and get them involved so that things can work better. Systems or decision making, and in the framework of the greater portfolio that we have for basins that are across countries, we have been working in the development of systems or decision making that are multinational, the integrated management of the water resource. In other words, platforms that perhaps can include all the inputs that the countries consider necessary so that their authorities can take informed decisions regarding management of the water resource. Perhaps it could be watersheds, BOS, or hydroways, or infrastructure. It can be quality or quantity of water, and so on. But the idea is that these platforms serve that purpose. Sounds very nice, but it's a big challenge and it's rather complex. But we have identified that within these tools, it's something that the Vice Minister mentioned, that is that we can uh, have being able to put and facilitate all the resources that we have for a better usage of the management of the water resources in a area, or perhaps Central America, which is a small region. It's interesting that the countries can collaborate between them to exchange information and based on that promote a better management. Nowadays, we are promoting a creation of systems for decision making at a regional level. We have been in a Plata basin, which is a basin shared in 4 countries. We're working there. And as the Vice Minister mentioned, we are improving the platform, trying to update it to current technology that can be fed and that has all the protocols that the countries need to have that guarantee that the information is accessible, that it's current, and has everything that it's required. And that takes us always to the technological topic or matter. And as it was mentioned, the platforms technologies are very important and also meet the cybersecurity and safety requirements. And we are promoting a system for decision making for Central America, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. And we are creating also exchanges between Costa Rica and other countries from the region to start promoting this type or the creation of these type of tools. Something else I want that we are doing and working and promoting is the creation and utilization of satellite imagery for diagnostics and decision making, and also the formation, the academic formation for schools and universities on the usage of satellite imagery for prevention of risk of disasters and preservation of the resources. We work with the COVID and CONAC, which is organizations in Argentina that deal with this, where we develop a constellation of satellites, and those satellites are a result of an alliance of a public and private sector. We launched a constellation of satellites that were on monitoring the humidity of the soil to promote a better use of the water for agriculture and then prevent disaster risks. The idea is to be able to develop them and test them, and then once tested, to promote the exchange with the CONA and other organizations so that the technology is accessible to other countries. So in a side, um, as the Vice Minister mentioned, that the thing is democratization of information and also the technological aspects, and then the norms and policies at a national level. And also to emphasize that I think the topics should be addressed from 2 fronts: the challenges that are from the sector and how it reacts intersectorially, and then the country and their institutions. And that would be it. I thank you very much, Mr. Sanchez. Now hand the floor from the mutual learn, because I think I still have my colleague or ex-colleague Kevin Chitungo in Osaka, and hoping you're still available to talk a little bit on the regulatory topic. Hello? Uh, yes, he's there still. I wanted to ask you, what could we learn from the regulatory system from Zambia and your experience throughout the 20 years for the regions like Central America and the Caribbean? What are the advantages of having, besides minister, institution, the government institution, and a strong private sector of a regulatory system?
It is outside the ministry's limelight in terms of not a department, brings in the dimension where you are independent in terms of some of the decisions that need to be made. For example, if you are dealing with the issue of tariffs and government is deeply involved, I think the sensitivity is more on the how will the public react, whereas an independent regulator will be basically looking at all the areas in terms of how will the utility survive and how can we still protect the customer. So there is that kind of arrangement that works well for us as well. But also in terms of determining or assessing the performance of the utility, you need someone that is independent to say the utility is performing well. Because if the utility is going to blow their own trumpets without no one checking them, it's bound to be exaggerated at times. So if you want to see how utilities are performing, you need an independent person that comes in to look at what is happening in that particular utility and give an independent assessment. But also in our situation where we have a number of utilities that are supplying or providing services, the whole country, we have 11 of them. It gives us some way of comparing them that creates a bit of some competition because everyone doesn't want to be at the bottom of the ladder. So at the end, that also improves efficiencies. But also we've seen that the cooperating partners are comfortable to bring in resources because they know there is someone who will be watching over the application of those resources. So I think from where we stand, the regulator has assisted the country to improve service provision. But also when you are dealing with especially low income areas, utilities left alone, they would rather provide water where it is an affluent area. But you need someone that can be able to direct and say, when you submit your strategic plan and your development plans, can you make sure you include the low income areas as well? So that voice of the regulator brings in a lot of positive aspect in terms of how the water and sanitation service provision is provided. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Kelvin. Y creo que es importante de seguir un poco
very much. I think it's important to continue on this line. So I'll hand the floor to the one from Trinidad, Tobago or Tobago. So Sarah, if you can share with us. I don't know if you can mention something a little bit on what you have regarding the criteria that were just mentioned. Or can you mention something else like having a competence system so that providers compete against each other, for example?
Provider, which is the Water and Sewage Authority. And while they are desalination operators, they fall under the utility themselves, meaning that they have a separate arrangement with the utility. But there is an economic regulator who does what Mr. Kevin spoke about, and they are responsible for not just setting the tariffs, but also looking at where the utility performs relative to service standards that it has set for the utility. And those are very much with the customer at the center. So how often does the customer get a supply? What are the pressures that they get that supply from? How often do you take to respond to customer complaints? So that is the sort of system of performance management that the utility has. But to sort of link that back to what Mr. Sanchez spoke about in terms of data democratization, we have a lot of the information that the utility uses to assess performance is not done on a real time basis and is not independently gathered. And because of that, of course, we have just typical manual errors, and sometimes maybe a deliberate alteration of data to reflect something else until the customer comes in and says, this is not actually what we experience. So that's the reason why we have come up with one of the CReW Plus projects we had, which Micah presented yesterday, was on this water information management system that would help to bring in all the data and information from multiple stakeholders back onto this one platform that that can be accessed by anyone. So there's data transparency as well, and they can then in turn weigh in on where the service provider is, or just in general, you have data that they can use for their own decision making. And not just decision making as well, but one of the important things that we recognize is research and development in the water and sanitation sector. And oftentimes we expect that the utility does that. But in Trinidad and Tobago, the utility is busy fighting fires in the sense of trying to provide water for people. So with this system, we hope that other entities, for example, academia, can now take that data and information and begin to innovate and come up with maybe technological advancements that can help support this mission of better service to the population.
Thank you, Sara. Yo voy a volver a la señora viceministra.
The floor to the Vice Minister so that she can share on how could we in the region promote the exchange and mutual learning between OEA has provided some guidelines and has provided some instruments, but I think the process still remains slow to generate regional data platforms, for example, or to have institutionality that may help the trans-border basins. So we have challenges in that. So what do you think on these terms, and how could we promote better collaboration at a regional level? Thank you. Okay, so I think the main challenge is sincerely how these platforms communicate between each other. I was recently on the Panamanian border, and they are doing an exercise with Costa Rica, which is very interesting. It's an ex cooperation exercise for migratory issues. And we have been able to accomplish through the platform that the European Union has done is to create a platform that communicates with or connects those two countries for a better coordination and the limit, depending on, at least in the migration case, identify the problem, and then one can refer to that person so that they can manage specifically or handle the problem specifically. I think when talking about trans-border problems on basins, I think we can start with thinking about a small platform that is shared one on this topic. And I think that what the user were mentioning was that saying that we're working at the same place, we see each other every day, and but up until now is that we are sharing between each other, and the people working there on the field are now telling me they're even sharing their food, and they are communicating, so they establish a relationship. So I think we could have high technology, but if we don't know each other, it's very hard to cooperate. So I think in terms of transborder basins, I think that's a big challenge. As the OEA was presenting, he gave an example where the neighbors of that basins are many countries. How do you coordinate with so many countries within one basin? So that perhaps is a good start of a relationship by connecting each other, and then gather the data and enriched with a larger vision to generate a regional platform. At the end of the day, the platform we have is a universal access one. And as it was mentioned, it's on real time. So anyone can actually access that information. We shouldn't be so jealous on the in terms of how we guard the information, or so vigilant and for example, on sharing the satellite information, and with the NASA is providing open satellites, that is providing information at a specificity level at a scale of 1 to 2,000, which is, I think, to this level, people they could know if we have tables or clothes hanging outside. So with that level of specificity, we already have tools that can may serve us and that are free, and with those land this type of information to generate synergies between countries. And so that's the big challenge. I would also think that the first approach would be how do we utilize all this technological information and from satellites or data gathering on field. How can we utilize that to establish coordination strategies and management strategies between the different countries? So I think it's a topic where the human capital resource joins the technological resource, and with a more realistic use. And with that, we can generate that norm framework that can work as the umbrella for all these type of activities that allow us to coexist. And I think it's also important to so that we can understand how we would work, from a coordination perspective. Thank you very much. And now I'm gonna handle it to my colleague Hans, so that he can give us an idea on how could the cooperation be improved at island level in the Caribbean that are presenting a particularity, being as that because they don't have borders. So, so what would be the challenge to improve the cooperation between the different islands in the Caribbean?
So, Vice Minister, she explained it very well. Well, we have technologies already. I think we have the IT systems, we have the remote sensing. I think all the technical issues are there. The problem is, do we know how to use it? And on the other hand, I have the feeling that we have on the small island like here in Grenada, but we don't know what data we have. So that it's more a managerial problem than a technical problem, and it's more a human capacity problem than a technical problem. For Grenada, it's really difficult to find staff who is trained in, let's say, hydrological modeling and decision support systems, and even in hydraulic modeling. it's the country is too small, yeah. So that you, and if you have people which are well trained, there's a brain drain, yeah. Then they go to UK, they go to Canada, and it's difficult to have really trained and uh, people here in the water sector working. We are really suffering from that. So how can we overcome with that? The one thing is really, I think small islands like Canada need more exchange with other islands or with other countries in the region. But there's another problem. So I have the feeling at the moment there are so many activities in the region, so many projects, so many platforms working. Uh, if everyone really approaches here, let's say our colleagues from Nawasa or from the ministry, they are completely full with only responding to these requests. We have to concentrate a little bit on those platforms which are really working, and we have, and especially that is, I would say, for CDB or BIT or for even GSZ, to concentrate on those platforms which are really are reaching the different institutions in our countries. I just want to mention some of them. Also, at the moment, we have on a very high level, we have it's called RSAP. Well, I have to check again what it means. It's Regional Strategic Action Plan for Water Governance. Yeah, which is, I think it's supported by CDB. And that is a very high level committee which looks at coordination of all projects here in the region. And I think on this level, it's excellent, so that the members of these committees really know what is going on. Yeah. On the more technical level, we have the water associations here, Kawasa or CWWA. Yeah, and it would be nice to really to support them, that they can support the different islands. I know they're doing that especially with emergency plans at the moment. I hope they would do that also with leakage detection and loss reduction programs. Yeah, on a very technical level, where they should provide support to the different institutions in the region. I know that our colleagues are always complaining, well, there's another telephone call from another donor organization, from another consultant. They want to have information, they want to do that and that. Actually, our institutions in the islands are so small, they cannot really answer all the requests. This has to be organized in a better way. And I think here is a very important responsibility of the banks, of the donor organization, not to overstress our institutions, but really to concentrate maybe on some regional platforms which then can help the other islands or other institutions to develop.
Hans Werner, tú ya me adelantaste un poco porque quiero.
Okay, so you mentioned something that I wanted to mention, and I want to do a final round to ask what would the recommendation would be for the next steps to follow at a country level, at a regional level, and also recommendations for the cooperation, for the international cooperation. Where should we focus our small resources that we have at hand to improve the data platforms and institutionality, transparency in what has to do with public investment in our countries. And finally, the impacts that we want or would like to have through the sector, not just at a direct user levels, but also, let's say, at levels from the Guatemala mentioned at a basin level or um, s- Mr. Sanchez, please, you start. Perfect. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So I would like to be very straight to the point. And the answer is pretty much on the table. First, we need that together we're more. And evidently, in terms of information, each institution and country has their responsibilities and capacities. So always the call is to interinstitutional articulation, not just within countries, but also at regional organisms. We have a great responsibility because evidently great part of the challenge is in line with things that in our side are considered as diplomatic, that has to do with the water resource, but also require a lot of facilitation between states and institutions within their states, so that all the information availability, not just of technology, but also resolution of conflicts in a cooperational way, it's something very important to consider. And I believe then that from that perspective, for efficiency and efficacy, not just for regional informational mechanisms, but also national ones. It requires a lot of involvement from the public and private sector, from the international community, and that's a big responsibility we have. And between that is the facilitation, but also the generation of capacities for our national technicians, so that the technician can, water director and their teams can understand all the facilitation topic that exists behind these technical needs, that they can have a strengthen capacity to go to their different international relationship committees or offices with a proper understanding that can facilitate technical negotiations or diplomatic negotiations, so that they can get to a better result, how to generate more techno diplomats in our sectors, and obviously our multilateral organisms. We have the responsibilities to facilitate this and also work in collaboration with them and together. I think the CReW Plus, it's a very good example of that, where there's 5 or 6 agencies that get together and agree upon something, and adding their specific areas of expertise. And that's a good example that we need to continue to do, and then take them to the country so that they can empower themselves to do more. And also in terms of financing, we agree upon that. We are exiting a pandemic where all the products are falling down. For example, philanthropic efforts and so on. So we need to be more efficient, and we for that need to sit down and collaborate and see what we have, and based on that, allocate resources to the best possible and efficient way, and also define the products, mechanisms, and more efficient actions. It's always in line with what the countries request, which is very important to emphasize. We are an organization that it's mandated by the country, so the countries tell us what are they looking for, and we try with in a responsible way to look the best solution for that. So I think that's the thing, the facilitation of the multinational organisms to unify and promote the generation of capacities in each country. So thank you, Mr. Sanchez. And now to talk about countries, I'm going to go to Sarah J to ask the same question. What do you recommend from Trinidad and Tobago perspective from now on, as following steps to improve the cooperation between everyone?
For Trinidad and Tobago specifically is to grab and go after some of the climate financing. We have a pipeline of no regret projects. And we say no regret because we are struggling right now to provide a reasonable level of service to the population. And then layered onto that is the battle of climate change impacts, and not enough countries in the region, not enough water utilities have followed in Grenada's footsteps and gone after climate financing. And I guess I may be preaching to the choir here, but the reality is that water is the most impacted sector for climate change. So we should be preparing for that and focusing a lot more on adaptation than we are for mitigation, although mitigation is important. So for Trinidad and Tobago, it's a bigger type of project that is framed within the issue of adapting to climate change, and potentially not just the water sector, but all utilities under that water sector, including waste. At the regional level, I will say that while I wear the hat of I'm representing Trinidad and Tobago here today, I'm also the president of the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association, and I think that it would be remiss of me, as we're talking about data, to not mention the IDB's Caribbean Water Study, which was just launched, and really benchmarks where utilities are against each other and how much more they need to go. And it's an excellent framework for us to look at opportunities to collaborate and push forward our regional strategic action plan for water sector governance and climate resilience, a very long name. And just learn from our Latin American colleagues, as well as other countries in the Caribbean who may be advanced in how we can bring across that coordination in the water sector. And I think the good experience that we've had with CReW Plus is that some of the stakeholders locally, in particular, who have not spoken, we have. So one of our projects is also looking at wastewater reuse, and we have brought in the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards, who would have worked in the past with the water utility, but we never would have worked with them at a policy level in supporting how we implement policy to promote reuse of wastewater. And this is not just at the utility scale, but also at the sectoral scale. So in other sectors, agriculture, tourism, commercial, and manufacturing. And that really is a nexus for us to begin that collaboration and coordination. Because one thing we have, of course, realized is that water is everybody's business, and it's very difficult for us to solve this problem just at the ministry and utility scale.
Okay, thank you, Sara. I think there are a lot that usted mencionó una serie de.
I think you mentioned very important recommendations for the region, and I would like to hand the floor to Kelvin. We started today something different with in terms of the exchange of experience from the South. Do you think that this exchange can be incentivized and useful to generate knowledges for both sides of the continent and enrich the cooperation between continents?
Always brings in a thinking process that help you to reflect on what you're doing and see how you can do it better. So an interaction, a sharing like this, obviously adds a lot of value because you begin to see the different, settings and how people are dealing with issues. So for me, there's always growth when you share information, even across regions. Sitting and listening to some of the presentation, I'm already looking at how else can we better do what we do. So it's something that I think we need to um, promote and see how we can continue to share and sharpen our tools, so to say, as we deal with the issue of water and sanitation.
Muchas gracias, Kelvin. Sé que es ya tarde en Zambia y ha sido un placer de tenerle aquí en este panel. Y paso la palabra a la Costa Rica más una vez con la misma pregunta. ¿Quién nos recomendaría usted?
And now let's move to Cynthia. What would you say in your experience and advancement that Costa Rica has in the region? How could we move on and move forward to generate cooperation between the countries and generate an exchange that is more fluid than today? Well, I would say that undoubtedly alliances have, at least strategic alliances or partnerships have demonstrated to be way to solve the problems in a specific matter. Uh, and so uh, adding to these alliances could be part of the solution. One of the things that have worked for us is the incorporation at a local level of the communities in the decision making, recollection of the information. I think we need to aim to that science or citizenship science and local involvement. And also at a local level, I think the main challenge is the coordination in the institutional coordination. And as I was mentioning, I think you were mentioning it in terms of financial transparency. I think with the data, open data resource with information that is consolidated with these indicators in a real-time platform, you eliminate or eradicate that transparency, financial transparency problem and allow us to generate indicators that show us if we are under this proper route or what we are designing as policy and normative has an impact in society and in the natural resource as well. We need to achieve a environmental balance because if we continue thinking in terms of country and not as a whole, as a planet, it's very hard that we can change these realities. For that, that is a very big task. But highlighting a little bit of my Trinidad and Tobago colleague was mentioning. So, if we want to talk about climate change and facing the challenges that climate change bring us, we need to move forward and not just stay in terms of national solutions, but regional and more. Um, and so also talk about what we have, which is rich in terms of regional natural resources, and many others. Um, and also to be able to address the challenges that we have on climate change, we have to talk about restoration, mitigation, adaptability, and also the importance of the mangroves. And if we have been able to uh, get into agreement in terms of other things, how can we not do it for these type of systems, wetlands, and so on? In Costa Rica, we have had to revert our deforestation, and we need to continue working on that reversion of the damage that we are creating to the planet. We know that what science provides right now, we are generating we are storing 10 times more carbon in the wetlands than in the drylands. And so mangroves are precisely what we generally share the most between countries. And in terms of management, you can see big differences. For example, you can see Haiti versus Dominican Republic, where you can see the difference on a satellite image. And it's saddening in terms of the results and the type of environmental management. And lastly, I would like to say that considering always the multiple users of the resource uh, in the definition of the policies and mechanisms and definition also of the norms that has to cover and incorporate always those main users of the resource as well as the small users because it's multi-sectorial and that makes it and implies a bigger challenge when defining the usages or uses. And finally, to close, I want to mention the importance of bringing to the table connectivity that exists between all these bodies of water. Uh, so that we can look for solutions that are more realistic for the cooperation. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And with this, I will close this panel discussion. Thank you. Thanking all the members, both presenters as well as participants from the panel for your great presentations and uh, contributions to, and it has been very uh, illustrative on what have the experience have been and the different realities to establish better collaborations between us. Then with this, I'll hand the floor to my colleague Julio so that he can do the recap or summary of the day and the closing. So thank you very much, Everhard and the participants. I think we also extended a little bit, but I think the uh, discussion and the enrichment that it provided it was worth it. Now I'm gonna move it to our Crew Plus colleague from Pedro Moreo so that he can recap and summarize a little bit of today's discussion and from the program. How are we going to move forward with lots of what was discussed today? Thank you very much to you all. And if you can please help us with the survey that we included in the chat. You can see the link there. We want to like your opinions and to see what you think in terms of logistics and contents. And now I'll hand the floor to